I didn't expect my mother to play Cupid, but here we are. She baked a pie, rang the doorbell of the new neighbor, the architect who just moved in, and announced I was single like she was auctioning me off at a county fair. And somehow, that ridiculous moment was the start of the most complicated love story of my life. The man who opened the door wasn't what I expected. He wasn't just attractive, he was devastating. His dark hair caught the porch light, his eyes cool and unreadable. The kind of man who didn't need to try to draw attention, simply owned it. His name was Ethan Hayes, a 30-year-old architect with a reputation in town for being brilliant, arrogant, and very, very unattainable. And while my mother cheerfully insisted I help him feel at home, Ethan barely looked at me. When he finally did, his gaze carried a sharp weight, as though he had already decided who I was, and more painfully, who I belonged to. That misunderstanding hung between us from the very beginning. Because the truth was, Ethan thought I was already taken. Worse, he thought I belonged to Daniel, my best friend, the boy next door I'd grown up with. The one who had always been by my side like a shadow. Daniel, who had confessed to me once in a trembling whisper, but whom I had never been able to love the same way. I remember the first time Ethan spoke to me alone. It was late evening, the sound of hammers and drills still echoing from his house under renovation. I'd brought over some coffee, mostly because my mother shoved the thermos into my hands with an expectant smile. "You don't have to do this?" Ethan said without looking at me, his voice deep but dismissive. Daniel wouldn't appreciate it. I blinked, confused. "What does Daniel have to do with me bringing you coffee?" That was when he looked at Miral. I looked at me for the first time. His eyes narrowed, a mixture of frustration and something darker I couldn't name. "I don't get involved with people who already belong to someone else, no matter how tempting." My throat tightened. He thought Daniel and I. My chest ached with the urge to laugh and cry at the same time. But instead, I left the coffee on his porch and walked away, heat rushing through me at anger, not quite sadness, but the strange sting of wanting someone who had already decided I was out of reach. Over the weeks, our encounters became a battlefield of stolen glances and unsaid words. Every time my mother pushed me to go help Ethan with his house, I told myself it was just neighborly, but the truth was, I wanted to be near him. Even if he never saw me the way I wanted. Even if his eyes always softened only to harden again the second Daniel's name came up. Daniel, of course, noticed. He always noticed. "You look at him like he's the last man on earth," Daniel said one night when we sat on my porch steps. The street was quiet, the kind of suburban silence that made every confession louder than it was. His voice trembled, and his jaw was tight. "And he looks at you like he wants to burn the world down but can't. Do you even see what that does to me?" I turned to him, guilt flooding my chest. "Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you. You're my best friend. You'll always be. Don't." He cut me off, his voice sharp. "Don't give me the friend speech. Not when you can't stop staring at him." The ache in his words was unbearable. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he was imagining things, that Ethan didn't want me, couldn't want me. But Daniel was right. I did look at Ethan that way, and no matter how I tried to hide it, Ethan noticed too. One evening, while helping him carry wood planks into his half-finished living room, Ethan finally broke the silence between us. "You should stop," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Stop what?" I asked, breathless from both the weight of the wood and the sharp edge of his tone. "Looking at me like that," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "It's not fair to Daniel. And it's not fair to me." I set the plank down, my chest heaving. "Why do you keep talking about fairness? I'm not with Daniel. I've never been with him." His head snapped toward me, disbelief etched across his face. "You expect me to believe that? He looks at you like he'd bleed for you. Everyone sees it." "Maybe," I whispered, my voice breaking, "but I can't give him what he wants, because my heart isn't his to take." For the first time, Ethan's guarded expression cracked. His lips parted, his breath caught, and for a fleeting second, I thought he might reach for me. But instead, he stepped back, his eyes shuddering again, hiding whatever had slipped through. "You should go," he said coldly. So I did. but every step away from him felt like I was tearing something out of myself. What Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had been waiting my whole life to feel this way about someone. That aching pull toward him, the quiet storm inside me whenever he was near, it wasn't just infatuation. It was dangerous, inevitable, and consuming. And no matter how much he pushed me away, I couldn't stop wanting him. By the time fall arrived, the house next door was nearly complete. Ethan worked tirelessly, often late into the night, lights glowing in his windows long after the rest of the street had gone dark. I watched him sometimes, the shadow of his body moving against the warm glow, and wondered if he ever thought of me when he was alone. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel showed up drunk, his voice loud and angry, echoing across the quiet street. He pounded on Ethan's door, shouting words that made my blood run cold. "You think you're better than me? You think you can just walk in and take him away? He's mine, you hear me? He's always been mine." I froze on my porch, my heart slamming against my ribs as Ethan opened his door, his expression dark and unreadable. Daniel staggered, his face flushed with fury and pain. And before I could move, before I could stop it, Daniel swung his fist. The sound of it connecting with Ethan's jaw shattered the night. The crack of Daniel's fist against Ethan's jaw seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. For a second, no one moved. My stomach dropped, my legs rooted to the porch as if they'd been cemented there. Ethan didn't fall, but his head snapped to the side, his jaw tightening as he steadied himself. "Daniel, stop!" I shouted, finally finding my voice and rushing across the lawn. But Daniel's eyes were blazing with something more than alcohol, something raw, a mix of jealousy and heartbreak. "He doesn't deserve you," he yelled, pointing at Ethan with a trembling hand. "He'll never love you the way I do. He'll ruin you." I reached for him, trying to calm him, but he shook me off, stumbling backward. The entire scene felt surreal. The golden boy who had been my constant, unraveling in front of the man who had unknowingly stolen my heart. Ethan, to his credit, didn't retaliate. He just straightened, wiped the blood from his lip, and stared at Daniel with a heavy silence that felt louder than any words. "Go home," Ethan finally said, his voice low but firm. "You're hurting him more than you realize." Daniel let out a bitter laugh, his eyes glassy. "Hurting him? No, Ethan. You don't understand. You'll never understand." He turned to me, his face crumpling. "And you'll regret this. One day you'll see I was the only one who ever truly loved you." Then he staggered away into the darkness, leaving me standing there with my chest split wide open. For a long moment, Ethan and I didn't speak. The night was so quiet, only the cicadas filled the void. Finally, I forced myself to look at him. His lip was swollen, blood glistening in the porch light. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Don't apologize for him." His eyes met mine, and for the first time there was no wall, no shield. Just exhaustion, pain, and something frighteningly close to longing. "He was right about one thing," Ethan murmured. "I will ruin you if you let me." My heart twisted, but I stepped closer anyway. "You don't scare me." His breath caught. For a moment, I thought he would push me away again. But instead, his hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against my cheek. The warmth of his touch was like fire, searing through every layer of doubt I'd been carrying. "I've tried not to want this," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Tried to convince myself you were his, that I had no right. But God, the way you look at me." His words trailed off, his thumb trembling against my skin. I leaned into his touch, my chest aching with relief. "I'm not his, Ethan. I never was." And before he could argue, before the fear could creep back into his eyes, I closed the distance and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, raw, and years of unspoken hunger colliding in one impossible moment. His lips pressed against mine with urgency, his hands pulling me closer as if he'd been starving and I was the only thing that could save him. I clung to him, tasting the salt of his blood and the truth of everything we'd both been too afraid to admit. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath ragged. "You're going to be the end of me," he whispered. "Then let's end together," I said, smiling through the tears burning my eyes. The days after that night were complicated. Daniel avoided me, his absence like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. My mother, of course, noticed something between Ethan and me, her eyes lighting up with that uncanny intuition only mothers have. But Ethan and we were careful. We didn't rush. Our connection was fragile, born out of pain but reaching toward something brighter. One evening, weeks later, I found Ethan sitting on the porch of his newly finished home. The sun was setting, casting everything in a soft golden glow. I sat beside him, and for a while we didn't speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you ever think about him?" "All the time," I admitted. "He was my best friend. Losing him feels like losing part of myself. But I can't pretend my heart doesn't want you. Not anymore." Ethan's hand found mine, his grip warm, steady. "I don't want to be a reason you lose people." "You're not," I said firmly. "Daniel made his choice, and I've made mine." He looked at me then, really looked at me the way he had that very first night on his porch. Only this time, his eyes weren't guarded. They were full of something I had been waiting for, something I thought I'd never see acceptance. "You make me believe," he whispered, "that maybe I can build more than houses. Maybe I can build a life with someone." I squeezed his hand, my chest swelling with warmth. "Then build it with me." And for the first time, Ethan smiled a real smile, soft and unrestrained. Months passed. Winter came and went, and spring breathed life into the neighborhood again. Daniel eventually moved away, leaving behind silence and unanswered questions. It hurt, but time softened the wound. What remained was a bittersweet memory of a boy who had loved me too much and a man who had finally let himself love me just enough. Ethan and I grew together in quiet ways. He showed me the world of architecture, the art hidden in steel and glass, the dreams folded into blueprints. And I showed him the simple joys he had forgotten: late-night drives, bad diner coffee, laughter that came without warning. One night, as we stood in his finished living room, light spilling across the wooden floor, he turned to me with that same look that had once scared me. Only this time I wasn't afraid. "I used to think love was a weakness," he said softly, "that it made people reckless. But then you came along, and I realized, maybe that's the point." I stepped into his arms, my head resting against his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart. "Reckless isn't so bad when you're not alone." He kissed the top of my head, holding me close, and in that moment, I knew. After everything, the heartbreak, the misunderstandings, the fight, the loss, we had finally built something worth keeping. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I was home. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.